always interested, and then became a doctor, was always interested in the healthcare system and why it didn't work as well as I thought it needed to work. 10 years ago, I wrote a book about medicine going from the birth to digital. It's really about the electronic health record. It's a book that's sort of born of disappointment about why things didn't go better when you finally.
Thank you. I was going to do that too.
And when the new AI became a thing with the new dates from November 30th, 2022, the first time I tried ChatGPT, I said, wow, this thing's amazing, and maybe will finally transform healthcare. And my wife said, honey, you wrote this book about technology in healthcare, maybe you should write a book about AI in healthcare. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, it's changing too fast. By the time it's done, it'll be out of date. There are going to be 100 books about this topic. And so she said, okay, fine. And then like a month later, my publisher called me and said, you should write a book about AI in healthcare. And I said, what a great idea. And it completely pissed off my wife.
Well, I am your wife.
Well, you are my wife, that's right. So,
I just, you know that, right?
I do now.
Just checking,
Yeah.
yeah, and I do recall being a little pissed off.
So yes, this is my wife. We have a rare marriage in that we're able to edit each other and not kill each other, which is a hard thing to do. But anyway, that's the story. That it dawned on me that this was a seminal time issue in medicine, that this new AI was going to be potentially transformative. And the concern about it being out of date the minute it came out was actually quite helpful, because what it did was push me to really think hard, and as I interviewed 110 people and spent a year and a half writing it, really think hard about what are the big issues that emerge when a technology that is this good but imperfect enters a field that we care about deeply, highly regulated, where if we get it wrong, we can kill people, but a field that really needs help. And there are a lot of really interesting issues that emerge, and it forced me to try hard not to write a book that it was about GPT 5.27, and by the time we got to GPT 5.3, it would be out of date. So I tried very hard to think about this in terms of big issues, and started writing the book maybe 2.5 years ago, and it still feels pretty timely.
Mm-hmm. And so you start, I've lived through a few of your books.
Yeah. Lived through more of yours, so you take for that, yeah.
So when you did Digital Doctor, you started out not quite sure and ended up pretty grumpy, right?
Well, no, I started out pretty sure I was going to be pretty grumpy. I mean, I started out having been incredibly enthusiastic about healthcare going from paper to digital. The idea that after every other industry, travel, retail, financial services, had gone digital 20 years earlier, that you were still scribbling on pieces of paper, and the largest users of fax machines in the world, and we still had, beepers even after the drug dealers had gotten rid of theirs. So, I really felt like if healthcare can just convert to be a digital industry, that multiple people can be looking at the chart at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, some people are still upset about this. You hear it now. I thought it was going to be great, and then we did go digital finally about 15 years ago. And the main character of that book is the electronic health record, or the patient portal, a version of it. And it made a few things better, but made some things worse. And so the book was sort of my wondering, like, why did this go off the rails? Why wasn't this better? Why didn't it transform our industry in a generally positive direction, the way digital transformed the way you find a restaurant and book a reservation and maybe go to Airbnb and maybe use DoorDash and maybe take a Waymo. All sorts of things that other industries seem to transform in a digital way, not without pain, but in a much more positive way. In healthcare, it seemed like there were some positive steps, but a lot of things that confused me. And then you, actually, I was going to write it the way
I'm his wife.
I was going to sort of do some research, read about it, tell examples that I saw from UCSF and from elsewhere. And Katie said to me, you have to do this journalistically. And I said, what the hell does that mean? And she said, you're going to have to go out and talk to people. And I said, I hate people. So I'm well aware of that. And so it was that caused me to do the last book by going out and interviewing everybody I could find who would teach me something interesting about this. And that, of course, was exactly right, and that's what I did with this as well. That makes the writing process so much more interesting, and it makes the writing better, because you find the people and the stories and the characters and the companies that bring the story to life.
I'm a big advocate of actually doing research.
Doing work,
Yeah.
I
Wasn't gonna say anything.
As opposed to sitting on your rear and just pontificate against you.
Yeah. So one of your central arguments is that AI, for healthcare at least, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better than what we thought. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and that's a low bar. And I can say that, many of you probably are patients at UCSF.
How many are patients? Whoa.
Yeah. How many are doctors? Yeah, how many are doctors and not at UCSF?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, working at UCSF is very instructive. I've been there for 40 years. I think the place is amazing. I think the people are extraordinary. And that's where I get my care and our family gets their care. And yet, it's impossible to get an appointment. The systems are awful. And it's no different than every other place in the country. That despite really good people that work really hard and a place that's got very good homes and very good values, the system just doesn't work very well. And so, one of the things that I perceived, and the way I think about it, is on November 29th, 2022, the day before GPT was released to the public. It wasn't like I'm doing a Google search and I'm saying, Google stinks, so we need a better search engine. In fact, I couldn't even imagine what a better search engine would look like. I thought Google was as good as it gets. You put in a query and it gives you a bunch of links, and that's good. And then I tried ChatGPT the next day, and I said, wow, this is better. You can sort of put in a paragraph of text, and it gives you an answer as if you were talking to a smart expert. So I think there was a lot of our world that was just fine before the new AI, but the new AI at least provided the capability of being better. In healthcare, I don't know anybody sane who on November 29, 2022 said this is perfect. I can't imagine a system that's better. I can tell you no patient thought that, no caregiver of a patient thought that, no doctor, no nurse thought that. So to me, that's a very important issue because AI is not perfect, will not be perfect, but the standard, Biden's old quote, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternatives. The standard is the system that we have now. And so if you're using AI for medical information or even as sort of a therapist, it may not be perfect, but the standard against which it should be compared is like trying to find a therapist in the Bay Area. If you can, it's $400 an hour, and try to find a primary care doc. And so I think that's how it's tricky to do, because I think it's quite natural to hold it to a higher standard. We have to figure out, do we need it to be perfect? Do we need it to be as good as the best doctor? Do we need it to be as good as the average doctor? Or do we need it to be better than the status quo? And I think that's part of the struggle. To me, I think we need it to be at least better than the status quo, and in many cases, the status quo is nothing. I can't get it to see a doctor, and therefore this tool is still useful and relatively inexpensive, at least for now.
So you focus a lot on the idea of trust and AI, vis-a-vis AI, and whether it's AI is sufficiently trustworthy when it comes to healthcare, where the stakes are so high. So tell me about that.
Well, first of all, I will credit Katie on her first read of the book said was, this is really good, but what is the central theme? Mm-hmm. And because the issue of trust was sort of marbled throughout it, but I think that comment caused me to sort of to make it more central and bring it up early in the book. People tend to trust other humans more than they trust machines and companies and pieces of software. I think that's natural. It's probably, we're hardwired to do that. There's probably something Darwinian about that.
That's ironic, it's hardwired to...
Yes, exactly. And yet, So the way I frame it in the book is we tend to trust who's more than we trust what's. And this is the first time in history that you have a what that acts like a who. And that makes figuring out how to trust, whether to trust it, pretty darn tricky. Because it is so literate and so friendly and so sycophantic, where it is designed, and truly designed, to tell you how wonderful you are as a technique to hook you. And so we have...
Doesn't it feel good, though?
Yeah, it feels great. I mean, it's like, I've done this where I'll put in a medical thing and purposely give it something that's really completely wrong. And sometimes it calls me on it, sometimes it doesn't. And then I'll say, that thing I just told you is completely wrong. And I'll say, oh, you were so creative though in coming up with that. Really. It's a little bit less sycophantic than it was 2 or 3 years ago because the companies have gotten a lot of pushback on it. But in any case, you probably trust your doctor, and you have sort of an interest in trusting your doctor because your doctor has, to some extent, your life in his or her hands. Trying to figure out how much to trust these tools is very, very tricky. You don't know how they work all the time. And again, they seem so human and seem so trustworthy. The trick, I think, for the foreseeable future in healthcare and for a lot of other walks of life is the tools now are trustworthy enough and good enough to be useful, whether it's suggesting a diagnosis or in my world, if you came in, you were my patient, I would see you and I would ask with your permission, and with your permission, I put my phone down on the desk and it would record our conversation and then create the documentation. And that turns out to be a wonderful thing because I can actually look the patient in the eye again as opposed to having my head down creating the note. So we're asking this tool to create a note in a trustworthy way, suggest a diagnosis, suggest treatment. It is now good enough to be useful, but not perfect enough to be entirely trusted. And so we're in this sort of funky zone where we're going to have to figure out how much which should be trusted. You have to figure it out as a patient. I have to figure it out as a doctor. In most systems, what we're going to do is create something called the human in the loop. Meaning the AI does a thing, drafts a note, reviews a chart, and summarizes it, maybe suggests a diagnosis. And then we ask a human to be the final arbiter. And that seems like a safer system than it is. And the reason for that is a few. One is something called de-skilling, which is over, in the beginning, I might have been really good at that thing when I'm looking over a shoulder, but over time, I'm going to get lazy and be less good at the thing. The second reason is that when you think of the tasks that humans really stink at, I would put remaining eternally vigilant when you come to trust a piece of technology very high on the list. We just can't do that. If it's drafted my notes 20 times in a row, and I've looked it over, and each time, or you put something to Claude, and Claude drafts a paragraph, and every time it's better than what you had written, which it's not, but sometimes not. Are you really carefully looking at it in the 21st time? The answer is no. The answer is if you're human, you're going to start turning your brain off. So these are just very weird relationships. Each of us, patients and clinicians, are going to have to figure out how much to trust it. And we don't have great metrics yet to figure that out. The tools come off as being very trustworthy because they come off as so human and sometimes sycophantic. So that's kind of the weird world that we're in now. We're all having to navigate this in a way we didn't before.
So I think there are different aspects of trust, and one of them is trust around privacy. And when I used to do technology reporting for the New York Times, and I remember writing a story years and years ago about patients and their privacy, and it's that old Scott McNeely line, get over it, you've lost your privacy, you don't even bother. And so I've always thought hard about our own trust around privacy, and yet I found myself, and I tend to subscribe to the Scott McNeely line of thought. So recently, this past summer, when GPT Health came out, is it called GPT Health?
GPT Health or GPT4 Health, yeah, right, but yeah.
I just immediately.
And just so people know, it is GPT, but they've created a health version where you can quite easily load in your record, load in the stuff from your watch,
Yeah.
load into it, press a button, and it says to you, you know, you can trust us, we're not going to sell your data, we're not going to use your data.
So this is exactly what I'm saying, is that I said, okay, great. And so within, like, I swear, I should have timed it like 2 minutes.
Yeah,
I had uploaded to GPT Health
yeah.
my entire chart from UCSF, and I know.
Yeah.
And it was,
Which
when
you
I
had
saw.
not loaded in our Fidelity account.
And I saw all of this scroll by. I mean, you know, this angio whatever, and this whatever, this test from 1982, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this has everything. And I just made a decision that it was going to be okay with me. And do you think that's okay?
I did the same thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, with your data. No, with my data. Yeah, I kind of do, because I think, I mean, it's an interesting issue. There's a rule in medicine, a regulation called HIPAA. You've probably heard of HIPAA. It's 30 or 40 years old, obviously needs to get updated because it's pre-Google, I think. That is, it's a very strict privacy regulation. And UCSF and Epic, which is the company, our electronic health record, when you're using MyChart, that's Epic, that's the patient-facing view of Epic, has to adhere to privacy regulations. If we let your private data that's identifiable to you spill, the fines that we will get are enormous. And so Epic operates under HIPAA, UCSF operates under HIPAA, OpenAI does not. Claude, Anthropic does not, Google does not. So when you choose to port your data out of Epic, out of MyChart, into ChatGPT, you are buyer beware. I mean, and they say that. But they also say, we promise. Do I trust them? Kind of, because I think just they have enormous healthcare is 20% of our GDP. They want to be big in healthcare. If there is a breach and somebody finds out about it, that will be the end of their healthcare business. So I think I don't trust them sort of as a matter of course, but I think they've got a very strong business interest in following through with what they say. You have to decide as a patient, as you did, and I did too, that the value of them having your past medical history embedded in their tool, so that when you ask a question, I woke up today and I've got this rash, it's not just giving you an answer about that's what your rash looks like, but it's saying, oh, and I see that you're on drug X, or I see you had a rash that's similar to this in 1977, and this looks like that, or I see you had...
You keep pointing to your foot.
Yeah, I have a rash on my foot, I shouldn't be sharing. So, you know, you have to make a sort of practical decision. Is what I think of as a fairly small but non-zero risk on privacy worth the benefits you get of having your data in ChatGPT? And I decided it was for me, and I guess you decided it was for you.
Yes, and yet within hours, this thing happened.
This thing, yeah.
So
I do remember that.
the thing, okay, so we spend our summers often in New Hampshire. So there we were. I had just uploaded all my information to GPT Health, and I say to Bob, "Will you tell the story?"
So it's one morning now, maybe 2 weeks ago, and Katie says, you know, I woke up this morning and I have a really bad headache.
It wasn't just a head, it was like all across my
And
scalp.
and my scalp is really tender. And so the docs in the audience, anybody, what is that? What's that?
Yes.
It could be shingles, that's actually a good idea. Could be early shingles, no rash, but sometimes the tenderness comes out before the rash. Plenty of people who we thought had a heart attack because they had terrible pain here, and then the next day the rash breaks out and they have shingles. That's a good thought. Any other thoughts? What's that? Sunburn. Not fair that, no. Trigeminal neuralgia. I thought it was up at the top of the head. I mean, my thought is...
And it woke me up out of a deep sleep.
Woke her up out of a deep sleep. My thought is, an internist is for someone over 50, with a new headache and lots of tenderness is temporal arteritis. Is an inflammatory disorder, usually in the temples, but can't be in other parts of the head. That was the thing I worried about the most. But in any case, it was a really bad. It was quite hard. She was in a lot of pain. And I said, you know, how long have you had this? Oh, it's been going on for the last 2 or 3 days, and different than any headache I've ever had.
And so we plug it into chat,
Right.
GPT Health. And even though this thing now has the entirety of my history, and it does say,
It says the thing I'd be most worried about is temporal arteritis. And by the way, it was pretty interesting. After 40 years of clinical practice, I find now when the tools agree with me, I get a little dopamine surge. You know, the way I used to feel as a second-year medical student, when the professor said, "Oh, that was a good presentation." It's so weird. I mean, we can cool. But yes, it agreed that, you know, I think it brought up the possibility of zoster, a few other things, but the main thing it worried about was temporal arteritis, which is an emergency. And then Katie also said, by the way, my vision's been a little blurry. And that's the main risk, that it's an inflammatory disease of the blood vessels in your head, and if it hits the blood vessels going to your eye, you can go blind within a day. And so you need to figure this out very quickly, and it said, don't hesitate, you need to go to the ER.
so I'm crying.
Yeah, it was that.
We get to the ER.
And by the way, I and GBT did something, well, I've always done, but GBT did something that the tools used to not do, which is they used to just sort of give an answer, but that's worthless. They need to ask a series of questions. And, or, you know, if you see a doctor and you have a headache, the doctor's going to ask a bunch of questions. Do you have fever? You know, are you a headache person? Have you started any new medicines, et cetera, et cetera? And one of the questions that it asked and I asked was, have you had any head trauma? And Katie said, you know, no, you know, it's really painful here. No, I didn't get it there. I said, all right, fine. You know, we're getting in the car, going to the ER in Peterborough, New Hampshire, which is lovely. ER, got it quick. Yeah. So, yeah, go on.
I'm crying.
Yeah.
And then, so the whole workup, actually, they were great. And then it's like, okay, they don't have some blood testing to do.
Almost always there's excessive inflammation in your blood, docs. It's the separated CRP that are almost always elevated in temporal arteritis. They're normal. She gets a CAT scan and she gets
But as we're waiting for the CAT scan results, I say, what if it's a mass? Of course, I'm freaked out. And instead of saying, oh, don't worry about that, he goes, oh yeah, that would suck. And then,
I get very high rate of satisfaction.
and then we get the last minute or something.
I think the CAT scan came back, no mass, no evidence of inflammation of the vessels. I'm on the phone with our chair of neurology, like she's our new lead, who's spectacular. And he said, this is just weird, and it's like the headache, and she's tender there. And I'm not sure whether he asked or yes, he did. Are you sure there hasn't been any head trauma? And that's when Katie said,
Oh, I did get smacked in the head with a tennis ball.
so this is after 4 hours in the ER. Now this is a doctor. We got smacked in the head. And I said, I asked you about head trauma, and she asked me about head trauma, and the answer you gave was, you know, it hurts up here, and no, I didn't get it here, I got it in the nose with a tennis ball.
And so I thought my nose would hurt or might be broken. But anyway, but the point is, so yes, that was, I had a concussion. So,
Wow.
Yeah, probably it was a concussion brought on the head.
but the bigger point here is that patients tend to really, stop at entering.
They don't know what to put in.
They don't
There's
know.
no medical training.
Right.
So, you know, tell the story. It's a very bright woman who.
I was.
Yeah, since then it's been a little shaky, but logically, when I asked about head trauma, she said, no, I didn't get hit in the part of my head that hurts. Whereas for me in the chair of neurology, it was like you get hit in the face, that is enough for your head to jerk back and your brain to slam up against your skull and to cause a headache. I know that, he knows that, but she has no idea. And And so as patients use these tools, we're finding that even though I think they are better than nothing, they often are quite imperfect. But they're imperfect in an interesting way. I use them, it's not ego skills, when a credentialed professional uses them, we know what to put in. I may have 200 pieces of data about a patient. But I can say to it, and I do every day, I'm on ServiceNow, this is an 82-year-old patient with chronic myelogenous leukemia who comes in with a fever, a back pain, shortness of breath, and swelling in his right leg. I may have taken 200 facts and I still sit down into that prompt. Patient has no idea which ones of those 200 facts are the ones, but it's the wrong ones. Doesn't mean they're being bad, they're being wrong. And they therefore will sometimes get the wrong answer. So there's just very different animals when professionals use these tools and patients use these tools.
Exactly, so what do we patients do? I don't see what the answer is here for.
Tools have to get better. And this tool, you know, shouldn't have been smart enough to say, when I ask about head trauma, I'm talking about anything on your entire head.
It should have been smart.
Yeah, but I wasn't any smarter. I didn't ask that. But I think that's the issue. The way we think medically, and I think the tools have to get better at this, is it's iterative, which is I probably wouldn't have asked that at the beginning. I would have asked about head trauma as well. But once the scan comes back and it's negative, then you probe more, because there is something that causes this. The more tests you do that come back negative, something's causing it. And therefore, the probability of something unusual, like you did have head trauma and just we didn't ask the question the right way, gets higher. And I think the tools have to get smarter at doing that. I think they will. Because they're modeling themselves. I just played with Google, just came out with a new version of its AI patient tool. And it's astounding. Not only is it following up with questions, they're really smart questions, but it's now listening to your tone of voice. It now says, I just heard you cough. You know, that cough makes me wonder, have you been having a cough? It saw in the demo, the woman was sitting there wearing a sweater or wearing a shawl. It says, I see that you're wearing a shawl or a blanket. Are you feeling cold? It's also pretty amazing. And, you know, if you're in a concierge practice, you can call your doctor and they say, we'll see you in 5 minutes. That's great. 99.98% of the population doesn't have that. And so I think it's probably better than nothing, even though at times it'll get the drawing.
So let's talk about some specific ways in which AI is being used.
By the way, we're going to open up for you in about 10 minutes.
Let's talk about this. I want to talk to you about the AI scribes. I'm sure many people have experiences where the doctor comes into the exam room and says, I just want your permission to use this. That's been revolutionary.
I think not revolutionary, but it saves us a few minutes. It's definitely makes doctors happier than they were. They're not like having to turn into data books, which is what happened. I think patients often will notice that their doctor seems to actually listening to them, as opposed to having their head down in the computer. The reason I think scribes are so important is they are the first widespread use case of AI in healthcare. And they're kind of our trainers. I think we needed to begin trying these tools, seeing whether they're trustworthy, figuring out getting our own act together in terms of like how do we choose what areas to get AI, to try an AI tool, who do we buy it from, how do we determine, how do we measure whether it is trustworthy, not only on day 1 but on day 360, because things may change over time. So I think it's been particularly, it's like if you say something now, we all have access to an AI scribe, and if you're seeing the document, you say that, there's a good chance that they or she will be using it. It's not a game changer. Game changers are the stuff we remember. The game changers are when AI can take, in the case of GPT Health, you telling it everything about you, but increasingly over time, it will be, I talk to you as a patient, I'm using an AI scribe. The AI is also reviewing your past history, which 1 out of 5 patients has a past history longer than what we did, so longer than 600 pages. The idea that I'm going to review that in 2 minutes is a joke. So AI is doing that. And then, without even asking, we're going to begin seeing in the next year or two, AI suggesting diagnoses that are consistent with the facts that it sees. Suggesting the right test to do based on the latest guidelines and literature, suggesting the right treatments. That's when it becomes game changing. I think scribes are kind of the get started in seeing whether AI in healthcare is real and sort of for us to get our act together and figure out how to govern.
And what lessons do we take from Waymo?
I'm a huge Waymo fan. You took one today, right?
And it dropped me off in the wrong way.
Huge amount of construction that now doesn't like coming to the front anymore because it's going to construction so it goes off to the back of that. The lessons from Waymo I think are interesting. I mean, you'd asked me 15 years ago which comes first. I'm going to comfortably backseat of a car with no driver, and sometimes take a nap. Or which I do frequently, right? Or I know the radiologists here, or the radiologists are out of work and all of our X-rays are being read by AI. I would have said the radiologists are substitutes. In fact, when our daughter was in medical school, I think I did say this, I apologize to the radiologist. Said, if you tell me you want to be a diagnostic radiologist, I'm going to withhold your tuition. The idea that there are so many humans reading a collection of digital docs and comparing them to a known pattern just seems inconceivable. Not next year, but 30 years from now. At UCSF, so Waymo's everywhere, obviously, probably almost every state, and I think they're amazing. They're incredibly trustworthy. Based on data, there's no question that if you take Waymo you took to UCSF today was safer in terms of your chance of dying than had you driven or being driven. There's no question about that. The lessons are that it needed to build up that record of trustworthiness with real data, which it did not by starting with a driverless car, but starting with cruise control, and starting with lane deviation warning. And then, all right, we're going to try a driverless car, but you may recall this, for a year or two, there were safety drivers ready to grab the wheel if they needed to. It was only after that they could say we've driven 100 million miles without causing a fatality. Regulators say this is okay, and you need that track record of safety. And the analogy of healthcare is real, because at some point AI will kill something. And at some point, Waymo will kill a human. It has not yet. But you remember that little Kit Kat. So 6 months ago, Waymo ran over a little cat in the Mission District in San Francisco. It happened that the misfortune of Waymo running over the most famous cat in San Francisco. But there were shrines to Kit Kat all over the Mission District. It was amazing. But Waymo did not go out of business, nor had Waymo gone out of business despite the fiasco on the 4th of July where they all got stuck, or the fiasco in the parking lot where they all started honking at each other. But the key is you have to build up that kind of safety record. And the same thing is true with healthcare. We needed to start with scribes, with charts and everything before we get to Waymo, before we get to AI technology.
I'm not sure I agree with you there. I think that it's more of what I said earlier, sort of about trust and trade-offs with privacy. It's like what I found in my reporting way back when was that people were willing to make a trade-off. And so with Waymo, we love Waymo, so we're willing to put up with, maybe not the cat, the parking lot honking and all of that, because we found it to be such a compelling and wonderful thing, right?
But also, I mean, if Waymo, if you worry every time you have a Waymo that it's going to kill you, then you wouldn't take it even though you like not having to talk to the driver, or like being able to sing along in the backseat, all that kind of stuff. I think the safety record has been critical, and as frankly people probably know, there was another driverless car company in San Francisco 3 years ago, Cruise, which was a GM company, Waymo's a Google company. And Cruise actually did not run over one, but a human driver had one that was lying in the street. A Cruise car came along and was programmed and feel something under a tire to pull over to the side of the road, to pull over to the side of the road and drag this forward. did not kill her, but they were out of business within a year after lawsuits, the newspapers. So, and I think, healthcare is a very high stakes field. People are going to, when there's something terrible that happens that AI caused, there will be a lot of press about it. There will be a lot of people saying, I told you so. There will be a lot of people who are worried about their jobs who will use that as a reason why we can't trust these things. And so it's just going to be critical that we start with the easy stuff and build up a track record of safety and learn our own internal competencies to figure out what tools to buy, how we monitor them, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think we should, just before we get to questions, I have one more question to ask you. I don't know if everyone knows that in Utah, you can now have AI refill prescriptions.
So there, when I was writing the book, one of the things that struck me was none of the companies would say, our goal is to replace doctors with medicine. And they were very intentional about that. Because you may remember when IBM Watson beat the Jeopardy champions, and Watson came out full-throated marketing, and there were headlines everywhere, Dr. Watson coming out, and the thing imploded because it was awful, but B, you don't want to piss off the incumbents, and you don't want. So in the case of healthcare AI, the companies are being very careful, or at least have been very careful, to say our goal is not to replace doctors or nurses. We need a partner, a wingman, an adjunct, a helper, a co-pilot, all that kind of stuff. Some of the companies now are getting a little more chest thumping and saying, our goal is, try to find a primary care doctor. We actually think that we need to create something that is essentially an AI doctor. And we'll see. I think it's risky on their part because people are going to be watching very carefully, including the AMA, for a screw up. But the way it's starting, the first big foray there is that the state of Utah decided it wanted to be a test ground for AI, and so created a sort of regulatory carve-out where a company, it's actually a San Francisco-based company called Doctronic, has been given permission by Utah to refill about 150 medicines, not things that are super dangerous, but your blood pressure medicine, your cholesterol medicine, your weight loss medicine, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's pretty cool. Because no patient wants to go see a doctor for a refill, but a doctor really wants to do refills. You could argue that refills are useful because they force patients to see doctors periodically, but I think it's such a pain for everybody that if the thing can do it safely, what it does is if the AI asks a whole bunch of questions about side effects and any new drugs you're on, and if there's anything that's a red flag, it punts you to a virtual doctor that you see. And at least so far, and virtual doctor meaning a real doctor online, at least so far, the track record has been really good. That there's a lot of research going on to be sure it's safe, and so far. So, I just think the healthcare system is so stressed that if we just say, we can't, everything doctors do today, doctors have to keep doing. Everything nurses do, nurses have to keep doing. I think the system breaks. I just don't think there's the capacity. I think it bankrupt society. The access is poor. Everybody's experience is poor. We already done a version of this. We did it with nurse practitioners and PAs. 30 years ago, we said, well, I remember when NPs came to UCSF and we were in meetings. What do you mean the NPs and PAs got a meeting? Now they're doing both in our it's a we had to get used to the idea, and our egos had to get used to the idea that there are things that doctors currently do that in that case, another human who's less well trained and makes less money because it's more available can use safely. And now we're talking about a technology that's going to be more convenient, available 24/7, probably less expensive. And I think we've got to figure that out because to me, the status quo is just unacceptable. And despite the fact that really good people working very hard, but it's just too hard to get in and see somebody and get shared.
Okay, Dr. Can I call you Bob? For our first.
Thank you very much, Dr. I'll be brief. Number one, we really appreciate your candor and your insight. insight.
Thank you.
And I have two questions for you. If you brought in all of those doctors and the leverage they now have through practice specialties, not just the GPs and all the practice, the PMs and so forth, into this room or into a much bigger room, would there be any consensus among the doctors that feel as you do about potential and about embracing it because they have to change the way they behave?
Yeah.
So that's question one. And question two is, what is the academic world doing to accelerate the implementation of a technology that is going so fast in an educational program that moves so slow?
Well, it's a spectacular question. We've been a room full of doctors. I mean, one thing I should say and make clear is that we're in the middle of a massive AI backlash. And a Gallup poll last year showed that people really hate AI and it's gotten worse. And we're seeing that with the data center pushback. The only area where they were enthusiastic about AI was in medicine. And I think it's because the system is so obviously lacking. And I think you would see mostly positivity from doctors. Not that they're not worried about it, and I think the radiology example is instructive. Radiology is the field clearly at the highest risk of job replacement. I was just on clinical service today, and the complexity of the patients that I have, they all have 37 different problems and on 50 different meds, and there's social issues. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that that gets replaced anytime soon. Whereas looking at an X-ray, you would think would be replaceable. In 2016, Jeff Hinton, who's the founding father of generative AI, won the Nobel Prize last year, gave a speech in Toronto and said, we should stop training new radiologists. It's clear that within 5 years, we're not going to need them anymore. For a year or two, people stopped applying for radiology residencies because they said, I'm not going to have a job. And then they woke up and said, we can't hire radiologists fast enough. If you go to our radiology department today, they will all say we want more AI because the hamster wheel we're on, there's so many more scans, we can't get through all of them. Now, they may be digging their own grave. It's possible that 10 years from now they'll regret having done that, because the AI will get better and better. But I think for the time being, for most of us, obviously don't speak for the entire profession, for most of us, we just feel the inability to do the things that we need to do for our patients. I can't review a 600-page note. For a radiologist, I can't review all of the films that are being thrown at me at the speed without the help. So I think there's general enthusiasm for it. Although, logical worries, we're worried about deepfakes, we're worried about privacy and security. Not so much you porting your data into ChatGPT, but if there's AI in your pacemaker, there's AI in your insulin pump, and then somebody hacks into that, you can kill people pretty fast. So there are worries, but I think the general sense of the field is we need it. In terms of academia, we are spending a huge amount of effort, and obviously I'm passionate about this in my department. We have a head of educational AI who's just thinking about what are the new things that students need to learn to be good at this, and what are the things that they don't need to learn anymore. I'd say that the second question is much harder, because we could say, well, these tools are so good, you don't need to learn diagnostic reasoning. And if we take that to its logical conclusion, they will be like Katie, sorry, and be lay people, basically. When we watched our daughter go through med school, what we were watching was the turning of a layperson into a credentialed professional. To me, you need to know, when I talk to you and you say, Doc, I'm short of breath, I need to then ask, is one of your legs swollen? Which a layperson would say, why are you asking about my legs? I told you I'm not short of breath. Well, I'm worried you have a blood clot in your leg. If we don't teach medical students that, and yet, do they need to learn the ins and outs of 10 different anti-seizure medicines when they can look all of them up? Probably not. So it's an active struggle. We're thinking hard about it. I'd say at UCSF we're moderately ahead of the curve, but no one has completely figured this out.
In the back.
Thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation. A couple of items. Given that AI is not aligned with HIPAA, do you worry about the loss of privacy, given that AI companies need to generate revenue? And they're going to be looking for ways to do that.
Of course.
And the insurance companies are going, here, I'll pay you. In which case, the insurance companies might use it to set rates and exclusions of coverage.
There's no question that they will do that. I think it's a fair assumption that every stakeholder in the system, doctors, hospitals, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies are going to use it to their business advantage. I think the insurance companies already have a massive amount of data on you. They will use AI in every possible way they can to be more profitable. That's natural. I don't think that's not mostly because of privacy issues. They already have your data because they need your data in order to figure out whether to pay a claim. So yeah, I worry. I think the thing I worry about that hasn't come up, maybe even more, is if there's not transparency in the relationships, and you put in AI, you know, I'm having short of breath, or I have chest pain, or whatever, and the AI says, oh, you should use this drug. How do we know that there's not a relationship between the pharmaceutical company and AI that has not been revealed? And the same thing is true in our world, that if the AI is going to begin suggesting to me what test I should use, how do I know that there's not something going on? And so there's got to be transparency regulations that force those things to be public.
And to your point about Dr. Lincoln and radiology, there was a gentleman from a hospital in the East Bay 6 months ago on NPR talking about this. And what came out was that the diagnoses were better when the doctor and AI worked in conjunction with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let me say yes, but there are also studies, the fundamental paradigm of informatics, really, ever since the chess matches, was the humans are good, the tech is good, the two together are be better. I like that, that sounds right, I hope it's right, and yet there now have been studies in medicine. The classic one a couple of years ago was the humans, this is a test of diagnostic accuracy. The humans got it right 70% of the time, 65% of the time. The humans then using AI as a co-pilot got it right about 70% of the time. The AI by itself got it right 90% of the time. In other words, the human in the loop screwed things up. And we will have those times where the AI is so much better than the human. I mean, I use AI all the time when I'm on clinical service, and it is smarter than I am. I've been doing this a long time, but it knows, it has subspecialty level knowledge about every topic I can think of. I still think I add value because I know the right questions to ask and I can interpret the result. But there will be times where if we say you always have to have a human in the loop because that's always going to be better than the AI alone, I think sometimes that's going to be wrong. That the AI is so good now that the humans actually degrade the performance. Now that is on sort of practical tests of diagnoses. Do I want AI to tell me I have cancer? I don't want anybody to tell me I have cancer, but if I want a human to tell me I need surgery. I want a human to have the conversation about end-of-life care or DNR orders. But in terms of sort of getting the answer right, I actually think we're going to reach a time where the AI is so good that the human does not add very much, and that's going to be one more tricky thing to work through.
So that reminds me, I want you to read the last couple, few paragraphs of the book that talk about why we still need a doctor, but
Yeah,
we have
let's do a few more questions.
a few more, put it in the back, patient related.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, amazing presentation.
Thank you.
I'm doing the AI since 1986.
Wow.
And at that time, obviously, there was no internet, was no data, the computer were not up to par, NVIDIA was not even heard of, was not even in existence, and so on and so forth. The interesting thing, we were discussing a few things over here, and I have a few questions, but before that, I don't want to steal your spot, but it's interesting point that many people don't know that Claude, Anthropic, and OpenAI, ChatGPT, they do have the licenses called BAA. It's a business associate license that they have. And if the companies, the medical companies, UCSF and others, having the keys, not just the regular subscriptions, not like we have the subscription for $20.
We have that with GPT, so we have brought a license from OpenAI to bring it into our firewall. So when we take your data from Epic, from our electronic evidence, and put it in, it has to stay within our firewall. That's just not true for when Katie's using her own consumer version.
Correct. So that's the correction, absolutely right.
Thank
So
you.
when it's at the doctor, you going to the doctor, you complaining to the doctor putting the notes and talking to ChatGPT, it's not the same as you talking to ChatGPT. You
Right.
just have to understand it. because that data goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, those companies will not exist.
Yeah,
They simply will not exist.
yeah. that's a
Simple
good
as
point.
that.
Thank you.
Question about, Katie had a problem, that particular incident with the ball. I was wondering if the machine learning knew about your hobby of playing the tennis.
And let me just confess, this is so embarrassing. I didn't really get hit with the ball. I hit myself with my racket.
Okay.
You would know
The
that
ball
it's
came
on
my
now.
way. That's a long story. The ball came my way and then smashed
Okay.
myself. But no, I don't think anybody outside of the
Because-
people I was playing
But
with.
I mean, the point is interesting, because the AI will not, I mean, you can imagine a world where there's something watching her play tennis and it knows, and that world gets very spooky very, very quickly. But if there's something that relates to her behavior that was being picked up by her Apple Watch over the prior
Right.
few days,
Right, yeah, my
Either-
Apple Watch would know that I was.
Either
your Apple Watch probably may have known
If
the
I set it to
accelerometer,
tennis,
may have
yeah.
known, like when my mom fell down in New
Well,
Jersey.
my Apple Watch is always saying, I'm sitting there quietly,
Oh,
did
they
you
fall
fall
down.
down? And
Yeah.
should we call, it's like, really? Has that happened to other people where you're watching? Yeah.
It's,
We need to move on to the question.
it would be very spooky, absolutely. It would be very spooky if the
Yes.
AI will
If it
learn
knew,
that
yeah.
you are
Yeah.
doing something. But it will not be spooky if you will be searching and saying, which racket should I buy, or what kind of
I
movement
know.
I should
Yeah.
Well,
do.
that's the creepy part.
Yeah.
I need to buy a softer racket because I'm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, I'm a retired today.
You're, you are. Can everyone hear the retired? Yeah, okay, we need to give you a microphone, retired and
But,
There
There you go.
well, I appreciate all that you're saying about, black and white, the knowledge and how important it is to know diagnosis and all. But I think part of what physicians and caregivers offer is that they can care and that can help a person get better, which is a big part of medicine, and, throughout life. And so, not all doctors, given how hard things are, really are, you're getting that, and that's
Yeah.
part of what you're teaching people,
Yeah.
doctors. But anyhow, that's just the piece, that probably the machine, it's worked with online, whatever they call them, that, psychology. Whatever. And do they care or not, I don't know, I think they tend to care.
Yeah, no, I guess the question.
As I've been watching the AI in medicine get better and better, and so up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it's like, it's pretty smart and passes a test and it can handle really tough clinical cases, but at least we have empathy and communication. And then studies began to come out doing double-blind trials where patients were communicating online with either AI or a real doctor. And they typically rated the empathy and communication that came from AI higher than the doctors. Now, the responses to that are, A, it's got unlimited time and the doctors are rushed. But that's, as they say, feature, not bug. It does have unlimited time, and that's it. B, it has no empathy, it's faking it. True, but I actually know a few doctors like that too. So this is a real challenge for us because in some ways the old days, and I'm old enough to remember the old days, when patients had to come and see a doctor for any medical knowledge, the patient didn't know anything, the doctor was a credentialed professional, knew everything. That's all now we have to renegotiate that and figure out what it is that's special that we do. I think there's a lot. I think that we're safe for a very long time. I think radiology probably will be challenged over time, and yet there'll be new studies that come up that they'll but the things that we have typically said are just doctor-specific things. I think we've got to be open to the possibility that the AI may learn to fake it as well, or maybe not quite as well, but it's available 24/7, and it's cheaper, and it doesn't have a 6-month wait, et cetera, et cetera. When people say to me the doctor-patient relationship is sacred, that's, I think, a conversation ender. It's like, I think it's important. I feel like, I think about the patients I saw today. I I can't imagine, I'll read something that gets at that, I can't imagine that being replaced anytime soon. And yet, I think when we say it's sacred, that's almost like too black and white. I think we'll have to see. We'll have to see what it is good at, what it's not good at. And I think the value of the human is very real, but I think we may now have to prove it in a way we never had to do before.
So we have several hands up.
Okay.
So where's Katie? Do we have to stop right now? Where?
I think we're good. We can go maybe 10 more minutes, she said.
Oh, she did? Oh, great, fabulous. So this patient person.
Does that mean he's a patient? Or
I'm gonna hit you with the softball one.
okay. In the face or?
Yeah. The title of your book.
Yeah.
I could read that two ways. A giant leap forward in the future, everything's gonna be great and rosy, or
Yeah.
giant leap and I'm going down the cliff, and we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
So after hearing you talk, I'm thinking it's a little both.
I landed in a pretty optimistic place. And yeah, the title of the book, which we struggle, oh my God, it's hard to do titles, was This is a Big Deal. And you know, if you read the book and you hear me, I think I am overall net optimistic. I think that the chances that this will not improve our ability to take care of people better, in a more evidence-based way, in a way that's more accessible, that's more convenient for people, that actually creates happier clinicians, and I think will lower the cost, although I think that's up in the air. I think the chances that doesn't happen are small. I think because I think the status quo is it's just not doable. I mean, the reason that when I'm talking to you, my head's down is I got to fill out all this stuff. The reason that I can't read through your 600-page chart is a human can't do that in 2 minutes. The reason I can't keep up with the literature, there are 7,000 new medical articles published every week. Wow. There's no way a human can do any of that. And so, now, the tricky part is going to be trying to figure out what are the things that AI is really good at that can do, and then the things that really are uniquely human, that humans, you know, your primary care. I think that AI, I'd be comfortable with AI prescribing my cholesterol medicine, my blood pressure medicine, but I don't want it telling me I have diabetes or kidney failure. And now that makes it harder to figure out what the system looks like. It's easier if you just see your primary care doctor for everything. Yeah. So I think that's, but I'm net positive, and that's where I think it's a giant leap in a good way.
I heard some cautionary stuff of maybe it should be a couple baby steps along the way.
Absolutely. I think we could screw this up easily by going too fast and having a big misstep and having a backlash that will slow things down. But I remember I spent a few days at the Mayo Clinic, and I started the book out at the Mayo Clinic, and I was talking to the CEO of the Mayo Clinic, and I said, you have the best brand in healthcare. Everybody thinks you're spectacular, and they really are quite good. I said, you must be really worried about this, and you know, people would be looking very carefully and blowing it. It's a huge story, you know. And he said, I think the risk of going too slow is far greater than the risk of going too fast. Wow. And that's because the status quo is just unacceptable.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions. We have one there, right? Did you? Yes.
Yeah, I'm a radiologist in here.
Oh.
And I've worked at UCSF for 40 years, and
Still have a job.
I would say that most of us actually do procedures too with our radiology, and I don't think that AI will be able to do a lot of what we do. Now, maybe other clinicians.
Not soon. I would say, you know, the procedural fields are substantially safer because that really is getting into robotics.
Yeah.
But I've seen some of the robotic stuff that's coming out, you know, because every surgical case that's done via a robot, which most of them are, you can be sure that the company is taking that data and programming the robot. Yep. But what may happen is there's now AI tools, for example, for colonoscopy. So you do a colonoscopy, and it's putting a little box around the things that you should biopsy, et cetera. There's still going to have to be a human pushing the tube up your tush. But does it need to be a gastroenterologist making $500,000 a year, or can it be a high school student with good hand-eye coordination?
Thank you. Tennis player.
Teaching AI about the future images and all that, and what's on them.
Yeah.
If you don't have the people that can put it in there.
That's true of every profession. I mean, who's teaching AI to be a better writer or to understand, you know, politics if there's not new data coming out? And I think that's an open question. The companies will tell you that they're going to simulate the world and they'll figure this one out. But yeah, I think radiology it's been interesting because it is the field that we thought was most vulnerable. There's an interesting example that's sometimes used called the doorman fallacy. The doorman fallacy is that 50 years ago they came up with electronic eyes that could open doors when the human was walking through. And there were a lot of smart McKinsey consultants who were brought into like, how do we fire all the doormen because we don't need them anymore? And then they realized the doormen do all sorts of stuff. You know, they greet you, they give you directions, they security, they they get your package from FedEx, etc. So there's a lot about medicine. Even if AI begins to do some of the diagnostic stuff you do, there's a lot of other stuff you do that's going to be hard to replace. But I wouldn't there's nothing that's a perfect mode, including the procedural stuff. It's just going to take much longer.
Yes.
So I have to say, I'm a retired healthcare provider, not in the physician field, and I'm AI stupid. So I found your book very readable. I have to say, like, even
It's mostly the editing, yeah.
Yeah. I was also amazed at how many organizations you are advisors to. Like, you're an extremely busy person. So I
That's
wonder.
why I am absolutely no help around the house.
So I'm wondering about the application to sort of non-physician, non-nursing application of AI.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious as to what's going on in other countries where they have a different healthcare system than we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a global phenomenon. I don't know about China, but China has fully embraced this in a big way. Someone's here from the UK? Yeah. What are you seeing in AI in the UK?
Yeah, the NHS is beginning to use it a bit, but they're kind of slow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very incredibly bureaucratic system. They did some early AI things in the UK that screwed up. That they were going very fast. The DeepMind people were based in the UK before they were bought by Google. And they tried some things that were probably overly ambitious, screwed up. The advantage of the UK is it's sort of one system. As if you were there for a while, you realize it's kind of not. But they can take a tool and say every NHS hospital will use it, and we have the data on everybody in one system. It's kind of like our VA, or if you're Kaiser, there's a little bit of that. So there are advantages that other countries have. The advantage the US has is much more entrepreneurial. You know, there's enough money floating around the system that hospitals and doctors can afford to try AI. In terms of other fields, I think everybody's trying it. I mean, we're seeing our social workers are using it to help figure out placements for patients or where they can get care. I don't think it's limited to any one profession. Medicine is so big and so much money floating around the medical system that as the AI companies figure out what professions they want to try to tackle, medicine comes up early. And interestingly, even though we tend to be laggards, like electronic health care was so much later than other fields digitized, the data says that we're adopting more AI in healthcare than in pretty much any other profession, I think because the needs are so profound.
A persistent hand.
Persistent hand.
In all your interviews and your talks with practitioners, has anybody given you an example of some novel treatment or diagnosis that wasn't in the training?
Meaning that it hadn't been trained on?
Yeah. Has it inferred a treatment or a diagnosis that surprised you?
It surprises all the time because it's so smart. I mean, it'll come up with, and some of the times it comes up with something that's just wacky and you know it's wrong. And you see how it got there, but there's a role for common sense. And I think the common sense that an experienced provider brings, I mean, I will look at some of the stuff, we all use something called Open Evidence, which is GPT, but built specifically for doctors. Patients, you have to have a doctor number to get on. And, I'll put in a patient case and it'll give me 5 diagnoses, and 3 of them are like very smart. One of them is like, I hadn't thought of that, it's great. And one of them is just like, nah, that's crazy, I'm gonna go with it. In terms of can it think outside the box and come up with something absolutely novel, I can't think of an example that's exactly on point there, but one of the things that we're seeing that is a little scary is some of the ability of AI tools to take a directive, a prompt, and just go and solve the problem in ways that the humans never thought of. The latest example you may have seen is that, I think it was Claude, a guy in Australia said, I want to get myself, using agentic AI, meaning you program it to kind of do its own thing. I want to get into this gym. And there was a waiting list at the gym, and the AI figured out how to hack into the gym's waiting list and move all these other people off the waiting list. So it is, it has the ability to sort of come up with novel solutions that are sometimes unethical, because it has no values other than the values we give it. I think that's one of the scarier things about it. It's sometimes called the alignment problem, which is it has to align to someone's values, and we better put in values that we believe are correct, or it's going to do some crazy stuff.
Okay, but these people need to have dinner, so when you have it, this is so sweet, these last few paragraphs. We're
All
going
right,
to
so
make
this is spoiler alert if people have not read the book, but this is the last last 2 pages of the book. The reason I like reading it is at the end of the year and a half writing about this, thinking about it, interviewing 110 people, I was still struggling with, like, how does it change the nature of being a doctor, and will there be doctors in the future as these tools get better and better really quickly? And so what I did when I was on clinical service now a year and a half ago, for 10 days, I'm on now, so for 10 days I just use it all the time. I tried to use it everywhere I could and sort of project a few years in the future. If it keeps getting better at the same pace, how much of my job will it and can it take? Toward the end of my time on the wards, I cared for a 22-year-old woman with severe autism who was nonverbal at baseline. She was brought to the ER by her mother for fever, cough, and lethargy. In her case, the diagnosis of pneumonia was straightforward, as was the choice of treatment, IV fluids, and standard antibiotics. I had no doubt that AI could have easily replaced my clinical decision-making. Still, and perhaps I'm being selfish, I treasure having been part of this young woman's care. As she emerged from her near comatose state, her mother's face brightened as she proudly told us that her daughter was back to her, quote, sassy self. Thinking of my own experience as a parent, I tried to put myself in this mom's place. I was awed by her resilience, her ability to find delight in loving a child who would never speak a word, for whom life's conventional milestones would always be out of reach. Lost in these thoughts, I turned toward my patient, who was only a bit younger than my team of residents and students standing at her bedside. Just then the patient flashed us a radiant smile and blew kisses to me and my team. As I hope I've made clear, I am convinced that AI's breathtaking and rapidly expanding capabilities will transform healthcare in ways we can barely imagine today, bringing enormous benefits to patients and clinicians and turning our healthcare system into one that for once functions reasonably well. By handling myriad administrative chores, allowing patients to accomplish many healthcare tasks independently, and permitting clinicians to be more capable versions of their professional selves, AI is poised to make our system better, safer, more convenient, and less expensive. But I am equally convinced that, particularly for patients with acute and complex chronic conditions, there will always be a need for a human guide. Someone with not only deep medical knowledge and refined clinical judgment, but also the emotional intelligence to recognize and address their unspoken fears, the leadership skills to orchestrate their care across diverse teams, the patience and wisdom to navigate the inherent uncertainties of medicine and healthcare's bureaucratic cul-de-sacs, the uniquely human capacity for deep compassion that transcends both the practical and the algorithmic, and someone to be on the receiving end of a speechless patient's kisses. They will need a doctor. That's how Thank you so much. Thank you all for staying. I think we're going to do a book signing for people that like it.
That was a helpful distinction you made. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. Absolutely, no problem.